So by now, everyone knows that Jagmeet Singh broke his deal with Justin Trudeau. But when it comes to Jagmeet Singh, the deal's not the only thing that's broke around here. Now, of course, this caught them by surprise. Why? Jagmeet Singh broke his deal with the Liberals. Well, this is something that caught me by surprise. I got this tweet just the other day from fun fact from Alex Zoltan. Jagmeet Singh's NDP is so broke they need to pay. They needed to take out a loan for $21 million just to look like a real party in the 2021 election, which they haven't paid back. I wonder what this. Maybe this has got something to do with why we're not going into an election, at least by the account of Jagmeet Singh at this point. So today, to talk about this, I brought in Alex Zoltan himself. Alex, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, Clyde.
So, how did you find out about this? And so, are they really broke? Is the NDP broke?
So yes, they are broke. They have ripped up the agreement, but it looks like they've also ripped a hole in their own wallet. The party is, and they have no money. So as of right now, well, as of their last financial statement, year-end statement, they have about $250,000 rounding up in the bank account. That's hilarious, Clyde. The average senior at 65 years old between all of their registered and non-registered savings accounts typically has $350,000.
Okay, so you have a background, like you're not just some guy on Twitter. You have a background in finance, and you know how to dig this stuff up as being an independent journalist. This is how you got this information, correct?
Yeah, so just before I came on, though, I was saying to you that it's that Aristotelian principle of the more you know you don't know. So I do want to correct myself a little bit on that original tweet. It turns out that not only can parties take out loans to fund elections, it's actually normal. All the
Okay.
parties do it. So the Conservative Party does it, the Liberal Party does it, the NDP does it. Not all of the parties, the smaller parties don't typically take out lending.
Sure, but usually they pay it back, don't they?
Yeah, so that's what makes the NDP unique. So yeah, that's right. That's what makes them different in this situation. And typically political parties have money, and the NDP doesn't have
Well, I
money.
mean, this really calls into question like how would they be any good at governing the country when they can't even govern their own finances as a party?
Yeah, this is all publicly available information, so any of your viewers can go to Elections Canada. You can look up the financial statements, you can look up the balance sheets for these different parties, and it is kind of a fascinating look into how these parties operate, because it gives you kind of a rough idea of probably how they would operate the country. So if you look at this balance sheet here that I sent you earlier, I believe this one is from 2015. So that would
Okay.
have been around the time that Jack Layton was still the leader of the NDP. They had $1 million in the bank. They were taking out loans to fund elections, which again is common practice. But if you look at their balance sheet, they had $1 million.
Right.
Fast forward to 2018, they were in the hole for $4.5 million before they even had an election under Jagmeet Singh.
Right.
So how this happened is anybody's guess. They actually had to take out a mortgage on the Jack Layton building. So this is a very large building. They call it the NDP headquarters. It's in Ottawa. They say that it's worth roughly $8 million. There's this hilarious quote in this article where they say that the building isn't properly valued. It kind of reminds me of, those old people who can't get a chip mortgage, right? They're like, oh, the appraiser said it was only worth 500,000. Like, it's worth $1 million for sure.
Right. Right.
Like, it's just completely ridiculous. And then year after year, they just kept taking out more and more loans. So they couldn't pay off the last one, so they would just take out another loan. There's a particularly hilarious thing on one of the balance sheets where they were paying a loan at prime plus 1.5, and they also had a term deposit that was only paying them 4.25. So at one point they were they were earning less interest on their money than they were paying on the debt. I guess it just never occurred to anybody to cash out that GIC and pay down the debt.
These are the people that want to govern our country, man. I mean, it's well, it makes me laugh, but I mean, they are the Socialist Party. They're the lefter party, and
Yeah.
no wonder they're completely irresponsible with money. It's
Oh yeah, and
unbelievable.
the way that they treat each other within the party is just like, it's just a total socialist hellscape. So the way that this works, Clyde, and it's the same for all parties. It's not just the NDP. All of the major parties, I should say, is that you have an election, and then at the end of the election, you receive what they call an Elections Canada rebate or a campaign rebate. So you get some of the money back, actually a significant amount in subsidies of what you had paid out in the form of a rebate. It's kind of a rebate and kind of a subsidy at the same time. So the idea is that you take out the loan, then you get the rebates and you pay the loan off. But again, the NDP is not paying off the loans. They're just taking out more loans.
They're just paying off the loans with more loans.
That's right. So they've almost paid off the loan. There's another interesting requirement by Elections Canada that if you take out one of these loans, you should have it paid off within 36 months. So they took out a total of $21 million in fiscal year 2021. They've almost paid it all back. But they're still showing that they owe somewhere around $750,000 based off of the last fiscal year end.
So where does that bring them to today? Like, so we're looking at a situation where they've torn up the agreement. He keeps talking about tearing up the agreement, but he's obviously not. And we're talking about Jagmeet Singh, right? So he's obviously not voting in a different way than he did when the agreement was in place. Most people are asking for an election. It's especially the Conservatives because they're polling so good across Canada right now. And well, if there were an election tomorrow, what would the NDP look like financially?
They would have to take out another loan class.
I can't help but laugh at this scenario because it's just so irresponsible. It's unbelievable.
But I mean, all of the other parties would take out a loan as well, right? It would just be assumed that they would pay it back, whereas the NDP would be less likely. So there's an interesting thing that they do in finance. They call it risk-based financing. So if you come into the bank and you have poor credit, for instance, the bank will offset their risk by charging you more interest. A lot of people find that unfair, of course, right? Because it keeps people who are maybe poor in a worse situation, right? It makes it harder for them to get themselves out of that hole. But yeah, the banks charge these parties different.
People like Jagmeet Singh might make that
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the bank does have to protect itself from the Jagmeet Singhs out there. Right. So that's the logic anyway. So yeah, their interest rate was higher. It's interesting. The Liberals, for instance, I think they were charged prime. The Conservatives were charged prime, and the NDP, I believe it was prime plus 1.5.
Because they're a higher risk.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. This is so funny.
They also, Bank of Montreal was the financier. So they were the lender, and they actually assigned something called assignment of rents on the Jack Layton building. So what that looks like on the individual or the retail level of banking is, let's say that you have a house and you want to get a mortgage on the house, but you're not a particularly good borrower. So I would put in the contract an assignment of rents, which means that if you weren't able to pay me back and I couldn't sell the property on foreclosure, I could put somebody in there and I could take the monthly rent from that tenant to recoup my losses. So they actually did that on the Jack Layton building. They set up.
It's almost like a soft foreclosure. Almost.
Yeah, you see it often in commercial real estate because it's not very liquid assets typically, and it's pretty hard to sell a factory. Right, so
that's
easier
fair.
to lease it out.
So what's this I'm hearing about? Like, because there are people that are MPs in the NDP government, and consider a number of them. How are they keeping the lights on in their campaign headquarters?
They're not. Yeah,
so you can't go talk to your MP. You won't be able to. Doors aren't open.
If you look at a lot of Google reviews for constituency offices, you'll see a lot of 1-star reviews where people say, "Oh, nobody ever called me back," or "Nobody answered my emails," or I went there, I knocked on the door, nobody was there. This is the reason why. So the NDP is so broke that these rebates, typically the way that it works, Clyde, is when the party receives the rebates, they send it back to the constituencies, right? So if you're the Conservative Party candidate for wherever, North Vancouver,
right?
And you spend $150,000 on campaign advertising and whatnot, then you get your rebates back and you pretty much get compensated back for all of that. The NDP takes all of the rebates. It all goes to the headquarters in Ottawa. It all goes to Jagmeet Singh, specifically to pay off the debt. So these people, they don't have any money to keep the lights on. No, and actually.
So if your NP is an NDP, you're just like SOL. You're probably not going to get a hold of them because they They can't even afford the call waiting or call forwarding.
Or even like the TELUS monthly plan or whatever, right?
Oh man, that is unreal. It's outrageous.
Yeah, so if you go on Reddit, for instance, this is a little investigating I did as well, because that's where all the socialists hang out, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Reddit, but it's like a Maoist re-education camp. It's horrific.
It's a been.
It's really terrible. So you want to figure out what the socialists are doing, that's where you go. So I looked up NDP volunteer experiences, and there's maybe a dozen threads or so. People saying, yeah, I reached out to my MP and I emailed them, and they just put me on an email list asking for donations, but there's no volunteer opportunities available. That's because there's nobody to man the volunteers, right?
Oh wow.
There's no staff. So who's going to intake all of these volunteers, right?
So even if they had a campaign to raise funds, they wouldn't even have staff to manage that.
Well, they would take out a loan, right? And then that's how they would pay. That's how they would pay staff who would then man the volunteers. But you can only get that loan typically in an election year, and you only would, right? Because in what other year would you need millions of dollars? But the NDP has been doing, you could almost call it interim financing between elections, which is very unusual. And it's left them in a position where they are pretty much broke. They have no money.
Any signal of them ramping up the cycle into getting loans, or is that still,
if there's an election
yet to be seen?
All of the parties will get loans. Again, that's a common practice. It really depends on how much they receive in donations, Clyde. So their donations have really leveled out. They're not much higher now than they were in 2015. So that's kind of the tail that wags the dog, if you will, right? If they don't receive enough donations. Currently, they spend more money than they take in from donations already. So not only is the negative sheet or the balance sheet negative, so is the cash flow statement, right? They have more debt than they have assets, and they spend more than they take in. So it's...
You sound like you're really campaigning for them now.
Well, so, I mean, actually, I do want to tip my hat to some of the other parties, specifically the Green Party. So the Green Party has $1 million.
Another group of socialists, and wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, sitting on the balance sheet. So a little bit of forgiveness there for the socialists. The Green Party actually are much better money managers than I ever would have imagined.
And the Conservatives being the ones who say that they're going to be the good money managers,
they have 9 million.
Okay, so they're doing good.
Yeah, they're doing just fine. The Liberals pretty much break even every election. They don't really put a lot into the war chest.
And Jagmeet's broke. Wow. Okay. Well, that's great. I'll leave a link in the description down below where people can find you on a daily to go see what you've been putting out there. You got lots of stuff. Great news. Great coverage on a lot of different Canadian stories. And I can't encourage people to go over to your Twitter anymore, because it's really good stuff. Keep up the good work, my man.
I appreciate you having me, and thanks for the kind words, Clyde.
Absolutely.